Have you seen the movie Wonder or read the book? Anybody? Yeah. Marvelous movie. I highly recommend it. If you haven't seen it, it is a story of a little boy named Augie. He is the main character. He's 10 years old. He was born with facial differences that required multiple surgeries when he was little, reconstructive as well as cosmetic surgeries. 20 of them or something by the time he's 10 years old. He, up to this point at 10 years old, has been homeschooled always. And now it's time for him to go to a bigger school and to be out in public. Now, because of his facial differences and because of the surgeries that they required, Augie looks different. And as you can imagine, in the midst of a culture like ours, a society like ours, which judges you by your looks, and in fact, our looks are often how we are seen and what our worth is, to be different is suspect. And so the story follows along with Augie as he goes to school for the first time. They're in public with other kids his age. And if you've ever been in school, if you're in school now, or if you've read anything about school, watched TV, movies, stuff like that, you will not be surprised to hear that some of his most difficult moments happen in the cafeteria. In these scenes in the cafeteria, you see Augie sitting at one of those tables with the long bench and the sort of formica top, all by himself, the long table and just him. While surrounding him are tables that are packed to the gills with kids in their usual customary groupings, all sitting together and looking at him, shooting him dirty looks as he sits over there looking different and by himself. And you overhear some of them talking about him and about how sort of shuddering as the kids imagined going over and talking to him and touching him and being infected by what they call the plague, or when I was growing up, what we called cooties. The plague. And you won't be surprised to hear that these are difficult moments for Augie. Cafeterias at school can be tough places, right? There's this one scene where Augie is there sitting at his long table all by himself as the kids are watching and shooting looks and talking about him and talking about the plague or cooties and all of this. And finally, there's one little girl who decides that she has had enough of this. Her name is Summer. And Summer, in the middle of the conversation, as her friends are talking about Augie and how much they don't want to get the plague and get contaminated with cooties, she stands up in the middle of the conversation, stands up, grabs her tray. Her friends say, "What are you doing?" She doesn't say a word, just turns and marches over to Augie's table, sets down her tray, and sits across the table. She says, "Hi, my name's Summer." He says, "I know, we're in the same class together." He says, "You don't have to do this." She says, "Do what?" "You don't have to be my friend." She says, "I want to. I know that the principal put you up to this. You don't have to be here. I want to be here. I know you don't have to do this." She says, "Augie, I don't like being accused of things that aren't true." He says, "Okay, I'm sorry, but you don't have to." Augie! He can't believe her, and he wants to push her away. Finally, he says, "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Why are you being my friend?" She says, "Because I want to have nice friends for a change." So we come to stories like today's gospel with Pharisees who are concerned about hand washing, and we have this interaction with Jesus. And I suspect it's pretty hard for us to hear these stories with anything other than all of the messages that have been drilled into us and have been pressed into us by parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles and pathologists and nurses and pediatricians, that we have to wash our hands or we're going to get germs, bacteria, dirt, other things, and we will get sick, right? And that's what this sounds like. The Pharisees come bustling up to Jesus. I always think of them in robes like this and sort of flapping as they come up. Why are you not washing your hands? Why do you eat with, the words were defiled hands, right? And we think of that as hygiene, except that we didn't figure out that there were such a thing as germs and bacteria until the 1880s. This is long before we had any idea that washing your hands had anything to do with health. And so the truth is, when the Pharisees come up, their concern is not hygiene, but it's something much more serious than that. Because you see, these Pharisees, these religious leaders at the time of Jesus, had a particular concern. Their goal and their framework and their project was for themselves and for all the other Jews, all the other Israelis, to be aware of God's presence and God's rule in every last nook, corner, and cranny of life, and to extend the rules and regulations that God had handed down to cover every last nook, cranny, and corner of life. And for these Pharisees, washing hands is not about hygiene. It's about identity. The people of Israel are the ones who are made holy, that God has chosen. And the Pharisees want them to live that, to be chosen and dedicated to God. And some of the ways they do that is by making sure that everything they encounter, like their hands, the produce, the pots and pans, are dedicated to God, are set aside so as to be holy or pure, so that they're worthy of God's presence. So the idea is make every last nook, corner, and cranny of life available and a place where we can look for God's presence. I'm convinced we would like these Pharisees. We would find their project and this idea familiar to us because we teach some of the same things, right? Our stewardship group has a year-long project for us to lead us into reflecting and finding the fact that God is present and serving God is a part of our lives in every last nook, corner, and cranny. Our prayer practices invites us to be aware that we pray constantly in every last nook, corner, and cranny. We teach these same things, and I'm pretty sure we'd get along just fine with these Pharisees. And so their concern is if you don't do this, so if Jesus and his disciples aren't following these teachings, they're setting themselves as, we're not part of you. We are not part of Israel, of the Jews. And so their question is, then who are you? And are you going to be leading other people astray? And so they come bustling up. Why do you eat with undefiled hands? But then we look a little more carefully. We look a little more carefully at what's underneath these practices of being holy. And we start to notice who is not welcome and who that's not available to. Because as so often happens, questions of identity become questions of exclusion. Who's out so I can feel like I'm in? Because not everybody was welcome to these rituals and practices. By the way, the word is baptized. That's the Greek word. So sort of baptizing your hands to be holy. Half the population, the female half, periodically was not welcome to make their hands holy. They were excluded. Lepers and other folks with sort of visible diseases, kind of like Augie, they were not welcome. Outsiders, Gentiles, people from other ethnicities and nations, immigrants and refugees, they were not welcome. These were not available to them. And so there was also this sharp line drawn in the sand that said, we are the people on this side, and you are not welcome. Often questions of identity become about exclusion, right? And so for the Pharisees, the fact that Jesus and his disciples aren't maintaining this line becomes a threat. Who are we going to be if we're not them? And so they're concerned, not with hygiene, but with who we are. Who are we going to be? And so they want to bring Jesus into line and help him to see the line in the sand, which is a silly thing to do, isn't it? I mean, we who are followers of Jesus and who know his whole story know that every time there's that line drawn in the sand, man, he keeps smudging it. And then he steps outside it. And he keeps hanging out with those folks, doesn't he? I mean, he is God. And since the beginning of time, since the beginning of our relationship with God, we see God doing this over and over again. Stepping over to that other side with a deep and abiding concern for everybody who's being forgotten. Widows and orphans, as James put it in our the reading today, but also the ones who are left behind by all of the systems that we've put in place, the voices that are hard to hear. God keeps showing up on that other side of the line and has that deep concern for those who are being missed. The Pharisees want to keep Jesus on this side, but boy, that's a silly project. Jesus over and over again steps out here. Because you see, Jesus knows that there's a much deeper threat to us than where the lines are drawn. There's something much more dangerous than whether we stay on one side of a line or not. And that dangerous thing is all the stuff that swirls inside each and every one of us. That swirling mess of fear and discomfort and our intentions and how we react to each other. How we've been taught by the world around us to see each other and how we might look at Augie or each other. The hatreds, those inclinations of our hearts. Jesus knows those are much more dangerous than any line we might draw in the sand. And Jesus knows this because that's what he had to wade through on his way to the cross. He had to wade through all our fears and disappointments and hatreds, all of our prejudices, prejudging each other, all the lines that we draw to try to separate us from those who God also loves. Jesus had to wade through all of that on his way to the cross, where he could stretch out his arms and show us how deep and how wide and how high and how long the love of God really is. Big enough to embrace the whole darn world. And in that embrace, in that kind of love that will not allow that swirling mess inside to stand in its way, and whose strength is stronger even than death, on that cross to set us free from all of those fears. We don't have to be controlled by them, because Jesus has already shown us what is stronger. What Taylor Ruth discovered just now. The love of God that is wider and deeper and longer and higher than we will ever imagine or understand. So Summer is there sitting across from Augie. And he can hardly believe why she would be there. So he says, "Why are you here?" She says, "Because I want some nice friends for a change." He says, "Me too." She says, "Cool beans." She holds out her hand to shake on it. Augie doesn't take it. He looks at her hand and he looks at her and he says, "You'll get the plague." And she says, "Good." So they shake on it.